Welcome back to In Pursuit of Magic, where we explore the things that inspire us, connect us, and the magic we find along the way. I'm Matthew Medina, and today's very special guest is an incredibly talented theater director and producer who has been part of productions such as Drown Man, Buena Vista Social Club, This Much I Know, and In the Same World. I'm very excited to welcome Matthew B. Cullen. Matthew, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I just am amazed by all the stuff you've been involved in, whether as part of a huge team or kind of your own creations too, where you're putting together a team to make something a reality. So thank you for being on.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I love seeing all the stuff you're up to, and I'm wondering, when it comes to being involved in theater and directing, was there something from an early age that really inspired you? Was it a show, maybe a person, or did it somehow just happen organically that you realized you wanted to be involved in that aspect of theater?
Sure. So I came up mostly playing soccer, so not at all like involved in the arts whatsoever. But my dream growing up, ironically, was to play on the Colombian national team in one of the World Cups. I was born in Bogota and raised in Buffalo, New York. Of course, repping a Colombia jersey here today, rooting
Yes.
for them this year. But that path kind of got pivoted in like middle of middle school, so like seventh or eighth grade. I went to like a theater camp of all things. It was like slotted right between these two soccer camps and between the people I met and just like the friendships I made out of it. And of course, like putting on a show and having an audience there and experiencing that relationship for the first time. It was like, whoa, I have never felt or found anything just like this. And then I would say like the production that kind of sealed the deal for me was you can actually see the poster right there. I think it was the second tour of Once in 2014 at Shady's, which is like the local touring house in Buffalo. It was me and my mom. We were like in the last row in like the mezzanine, and I was 14, 15 maybe, and they were swearing and making funny jokes that were just really Irish, and I thought they were hysterical. Then there's a song called Gold a cappella in it, and it's just very still. It's very quiet. It's delicate. And the show isn't like that for the most part. It's really moving. It's funny. The actors are playing their own instruments. They're very athletic and dynamic. And all of a sudden, it just halts. And we were just able to all breathe together through that moment. And then the lights shift and it takes us into the final moments of the play. And I was like, whoa, okay, I want to do that. And that's kind of what I've been chasing ever since.
That's amazing because, yeah, that experience you had just sounds like the beautiful magic of experiencing theater and being like, this is something special. And so it's amazing also that, yeah,
Sure.
you were a teenager. And so it kind of helped you like see this other world that's out there and maybe pivot a bit. So I'm wondering, what were your next steps after you were so like overwhelmed by that experience?
I am a really stubborn person and I'm a really committed person. My parents will always testify to both. But with that, it was okay, cool. I really like theater and I think I might love it more than soccer, even. How do I just throw myself out there and just learn as much about it as possible? So it became doing a whole bunch of community theater. I joined like the choir in high school. I was already playing percussion in the band like in elementary and middle school, but I really, really committed to that and started to learn about all the different rhythms and like how to read music, treble clef, bass clef, just starting to get a general understanding of how theater worked. And it started really in the realm of musical theater. That was like the most tangible thing kind of in that period of my life. And I did so many community musicals and things like that. I went from soccer practices to musicals at night. So I finished like high school, always having performed because that was the gateway to theater for so many people, myself included. And I was like, okay, cool. I think I know a lot about this, but I wasn't in love with the idea of performing. It was just the way I could be in that environment. And so kind of come college, it was, well, what else can I explore here? What else can I do while still being here, but not on stage?
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because it's an interesting step to take, to step into a director's shoes, because you really have to be committed to it, which, like you were saying, you are. When you commit to something, you commit. So I'm wondering what that experience was like, kind of taking on that role of having to put something together and kind of like lead everyone else.
There was like, I was a community theater when I was in high school, and one of the directors, I think it was Guys and Dolls we were doing, and he was giving notes to the full company, and then he was like, he whittled it down, full company notes, actor specific notes, or like group specific notes, actor specific notes. And I would always just kind of linger in the wings the whole entire time, like even after all the group notes were done, because I was just in the ensemble. And like I'd listen to all the notes he'd give to everyone else. And one day, like he caught me doing this, And he was like, I would like, it's, what are you still doing here? I'm like, oh, this is interesting to me. And he said something along the lines of like, oh, my job as a director is to play every single character and to think about every single character. And I don't want to play any characters. Let me be clear here. But I love understanding the DNA of a world. And I think a lot of that comes from I grew up like playing with Legos so very much. Legos and a lot of video games. And I think the things that both of those have in common is Legos in a very tangible way, video games in a very unique way. You're building worlds and you're getting to be a part of that world in some degree, right? And I think my childhood is full of memories of just like the battles I would have with my Lego Star Wars characters or my knights and stuff, and then the just late night gaming with my friends as we're playing like Battlefront 2 or something like that. And it was the idea of being able to craft an environment or a world where other people can exist in and explore with it and have, maybe it's an emotional journey, maybe it's just a joyful journey. There's something about that that I always found appealing. So that was kind of my gateway into directing and even producing, is getting to build a world that other people can exist and see themselves in.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to connect to an audience, which is such a big part of theater, I think. It's clearly how it influenced you and your experience of theater. And so I'm wondering, you stepping into that role, were there any reservations or anxieties that you felt like you had to overcome to kind of take on the lead?
I think I went in pretty arrogantly, more so in the sense of I have no idea what I'm doing, so there's only one way to find out. And I think the anxieties have actually only increased the longer I've been directing. I'm grateful. I came up, my first semester of college was like fall 2019, spring 2020. We knew what happened that spring. That's not news to anyone. And for a lot of people, the pandemic, they might say it kind of set back their college career, kind of really halted it for a moment. There was a big pause, but that wasn't necessarily my experience. For me, I went to undergrad at like a rural place upstate New York. I had some great faculty there, and I did learn a whole lot. But the faculty couldn't teach me everything I wanted to know about directing or working just on the types of plays that I wanted to be doing. And the pandemic then said, wait a second, there's a lot of people who have a lot of free time and they're willing to talk about it, talk about what they do, share their learnings, share their wisdom with you. And so I ditched a lot of classes, and I went and sat in like on a lot of Zoom webinars and just started listening to these professionals I never would have had access to before and absorbing every bit of wisdom I could from them. I think I walked away from like the year, like summer 2020 to like summer 2021 with like 5 journals about this big full of notes, right? Identifying different like leadership vocabulary, different management vocabulary. How are we going to talk about all the different identities that exist, their intersections, how that informs the work that we're doing, and how we need to be very conscious of that as we're moving through a workspace, especially as a manager, especially as a leader. I think I'm grateful that all of that's really informed my practice and informed all of my anxieties now. Because I'm like, okay, I want to make sure I'm thinking about all of this because God, I wasn't thinking about it when I started. Not in a bad way, but just, oh, I had no clue.
In some ways, that could be a blessing. I know sometimes being so aware of every little tiny detail that goes into something can make someone so anxious that they don't take that first step. Like there takes a level of confidence and willfulness to just kind of jump in. And then the anxiety kind of comes on more later as you start realizing how important it is to you, how intricate it is, how much you love it. You want to do well by it, which it seems like you're very dedicated to. And you mentioned how
It's the whole
the pandemic kind of caused some opportunities maybe that wouldn't have been around without it. I'm wondering also how that informed kind of your opportunities and connecting with others that maybe we should be more aware of now when we're not, you know, quote unquote, let's cross our fingers in a pandemic. But maybe some things that need to change in the way theater works and the way people share.
Yeah, that's a great thought there, and a question. I think my motto as I was moving through the pandemic and moving through with my classmates and peers was like, we don't need a theater to make theater, the traditional theater that we think of. I think theater comes down to kind of 2 main points, which a director and designer, Jared Mazacci, tweeted out. And I went, oh my God, wait, that's so true. It's the idea of co presence. So that means, okay, the artists and the audience need to be together and like existing there together and informing each other in their presence, and the idea of liveness. Like a movie is not theater because it's not live. The audience can't inform what's happening on screen, right? So if you don't have liveness and co-presence, you don't necessarily have theater, and it's very difficult on Zoom. Do not get me wrong there. However, it was still possible. And it was really awkward and it was really clunky in the pandemic. We could do a whole bunch of table reads and have the audience like with their mics unmuted and it could just be loud and noisy. You hear a cat in the background, but that's kind of okay. If you embrace it at least, and if you set up a culture and manage expectations that allow for that to happen. And so while I don't necessarily create a whole lot of full quote unquote products on Zoom anymore, there's plenty of like Zoom recordings I have of work I did back then. I do like a lot of new play development on Zoom. A writer I work with named Alexis Elisa Macedo lives over in Rhode Island. I'm over in here in New York City, but all of our pretty much all of our work happens on Zoom together, and we bring in actors for table reads every other month, basically, just trying out new pages, trying new things, and we're able to continue to make space digitally rather than physical space that might cost us a lot of money having to travel her from Rhode Island down to New York. It saves a lot of logistics, and I think we still get the job done.
Absolutely. It sounds like what is helpful is that it helps you connect and work with others who are not close by and have these partnerships that maybe you wouldn't have had otherwise.
And I think it allows us to get really creative, right? Everyone will often say something along the lines of limitations creates freedom. And I really believe in that. There's two pieces I've directed over the last 2 years that were built entirely on Zoom with like 4 hours in person to both tech it and put it all together. And it was like, okay, cool. We actually can learn three actors learn this choreography and just space it out in person. We can kind of mark through all this fight work and really explain the technique of it, have them bring in like a pillow and use that pillow as a stand-in to understand spacing and things like that. Or with this whole other piece, we did Foley design. And we had 5 actors build a 10 minutes worth of Foley art that was almost nonstop. And we did that on Zoom. And again, it's funky, it's quirky, but I think it all again comes back. My whole thesis is most of life comes back down to managing expectations. And if you just can manage expectations accordingly, often I find success. And often I find I can build community and a culture of agency. And there is a way to do that digitally.
Yeah, and I think maybe there's an element of being pleasantly surprised when you manage expectations. Like it could be beyond what you imagined it to be, which
Hmm.
is always a great thing. And with those successes, of
That's
course,
really great.
well, I would think just because at least the way I try to think about things for myself is like if I manage my expectations to a certain point, like that doesn't mean I'm not open to something greater happening, but you never know. And I don't know what's out there. I don't know what could happen. And I think one thing I'm also learning is that if I think there's one way to get somewhere or to do something, there's so many other ways. And so if something takes a swerve, it may get me to a different place that's even better than what I first thought, but never imagined before. And it seems like that's the same for a lot of people in creative fields.
So we're institutionalized and socialized to have this very binary way of thinking. It's a pillar of white supremacy culture. Definitely worth Googling the pillars of white supremacy culture if you never have. It's really redefined the way I look at the world and look at my job. But truly, where it's said, okay, it's either this or that. And if it's not that, it can't happen. And that's just not reality. There's always multiple ways to solve a problem. And as soon as we get creative and start looking for those third, fourth, or fifth ideas, like you just said, often it's maybe not the better one. I'm not sure if there's a world of better or worse, but certainly one full of abundance.
Absolutely. In this, I think any creative field, especially, there's so many different ways that things can happen. I mean, with every success, there's like 10 opportunities that didn't work out, or closed doors, or disappointments. And so I'm wondering when those moments happen, how have you learned to overcome them, to keep going, to keep that fire lit?
One of my goals, I'm only like in my mid 20s right now. And one of the things I keep telling myself every day is, well, every day my goal is to be learning. I hope that never stops throughout my whole entire life. And especially in this period, my goal is just like, let me learn as much as I can and make as many mistakes as I can right now and do it at like this micro level. Because I'm not doing tons of projects. I'm not at least leading tons of projects that are at a huge macro and people are aware of and following my work to this extent. I'm really lucky. No one really knows who I am. I was surprised you reached out. I'm like, okay, hi. I guess someone knows who I am. But to that point, it's a lot. And I learned a lot of this honestly through the pandemic, 2020, and a lot of those classes and webinars that I was in. It's just being able to recognize what does accountability mean, what does it look like, and how do I practice it. And combining that with an ability to listen to people, to circumstance, and to be able to anticipate, I think those three things have helped me make sure that every mistake I make, because there's been plenty and there will be plenty more, is followed with accountability, because my goal is to never make the same mistake twice, and making sure that we can at least figure out a path forward to address the harm if harm is ever done, and make sure it isn't repeated. I think that is the goal, whether it's we're doing theater, whether we're in a kitchen, whether we're doing computer science. I think the goal is just harm reduction, if should it happen, but truly harm prevention.
Um, but yeah, I mean, you were talking about accountability and depending on others a lot and how that's helpful. And I'm wondering also, what role do other people in community play in the moments where things don't work out because someone else said no, or there was a closed door, or just something didn't pan out and it was the mistake of no one. It's just missed opportunities. And that could also be very disappointing. Sometimes it's disheartening. And, you never know if even after big successes, if there's a stretch of time where things are just not happening the way you'd like them to. And those could be the hardest moments to kind of get through, to get back to the successful moments because they're there, they're going to happen, but it's about getting there again.
Yeah, I laugh because I think I'm going to be entering one of those moments right now. And I do think it's about how we frame success as well. I don't necessarily believe that just because I'm working back to back gigs and all of these different things means I'm successful, right? Or like the amount of gigs is not equal to the amount of success I have. I'm really trying to embrace the fact that time without working on big jobs or jobs that are paying me in general, at least theater jobs, that doesn't like equivalent equal my success. What equals my success is how I'm using my time. If it's bringing me joy or bringing me education, and if I feel like I went to bed having learned something that day. I think with that kind of reframe, I don't know. With that reframe, I'm really centering for myself the fact that like it's my worth doesn't come down to what I'm working on, or the past credits I have, or the future credits I will, but rather kind of what I'm able to center as my values, as well as what I'm walking away with at the end of the day. And I can learn maybe not just as much, but I can learn quite a bit on my own, or quite a bit like with a group of people in a room that because I said, hey, I don't have a job right now, let's create some art together and see what happens. Of course, it does feel really great when I'm on a nice gig that's, paying me
Of
close to a
course,
living
yeah.
wage, but it doesn't always. And I'm trying to find the joy in that too.
Yeah, I think it's very important to find your value in just the person you are and in doing things in general. What I keep hearing from others is that have more than one thing that you love to do and just do those things because there's times where maybe you'll be doing one thing and not the other and then you'll switch back and forth. It's just part of what makes you you. It's part of what keeps you moving and flexing different muscles. And then, yeah, like you said, community people creating with others can sometimes be the biggest source of inspiration, keeping a fire lit. Everyone's kind of going through their own journey. And I think the facade or the lie, especially in any creative field, is that lonely feeling in the harder moments when in reality you're not alone, but it feels so lonely and isolating sometimes because at the end of the day it's your journey, and so yours is not identical to someone else's, but you're all going through a similar experience. And it's not everyone talks about those moments. They talk about the successes. They say, "Oh, I did this for years," and then, "Yeah, this was great. I don't know how it happened." But then there's all these little moments that no one talks about, but I think are so important because they're what got people to where they are.
Like, let's talk about it a little more. What's getting me through month to month at this point is like, oh, I work at Equinox part time. That is what's paying my bills. When even though I'm doing a lot of full time gigs, or I was throughout most of this year, they were not paying me enough to be able to live. These are at some esteemed institutions. These are some big workshops, and it still comes down to the reality that this is a tough industry to work in financially and time wise. So it costs quite a bit to be able to do it, not only of your time, but of your energy, of your effort, and of your pocketbook. And I don't know. I think that stigma around talking about the little things that allow us to do this or this downtime, I kind of want to just eradicate it totally because there's no shame in it. I don't think there should be any shame in it, at least. And I think we can normalize that this is hard and how we get through it. Maybe not normalize that it's hard, but normalize that we're all going through it.
Yeah, I think maybe it's important for others who want to do something similar and should know
Yeah.
kind of the reality of it, to know what to prepare for, and to know that it's okay for them to do what they need to do to get done what they need to get done, which I think is very important. And that brings me to my next question, actually, which is what advice would you give to others who have a dream but are disheartened by the enormity of it or all the little things that go into it and all the obstacles that can come up in the way.
God, it would start with probably the best piece of advice I've ever heard, which is just slow the fuck down. I think there's another pillar of white supremacy culture is the idea of urgency. And I have not found a lot of success whenever I try to rush anything. I also, like, in pairing with that, I think it was Andre de Shields when he won a Tony. Part of his speech was the phrase, slowly is the fastest way there. And I really try and keep that in mind, both as I'm working in gigs, as I'm working in multiple gigs at once, as I have a dry spouts like right now. What I'm trying to remember is everything is happening the way it's supposed to. And I want to be very intentional about how I am using this time. And I say like I'm in a dry spell right now, but I'm actually like I'm doing other work. It's just things I'm producing instead of things are paying that other people are paying me for. You know, I'm able to use this time of slowness to invest in myself in really different ways that I'm not always able to. So I guess I'd maybe pair slow the fuck down. I'm not sure if I can swear. I've done it twice now, but
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'd maybe pair the phrase also with look for the knowledge, look for the education, look for the opportunity. It's everywhere. It's just a matter of can we see it or not?
Agreed. And it makes me think of, I say this quote a lot now because I heard Jaime Lozano say this, but he once said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And I think
Mm.
part of that is, yeah, slowing down, working on your craft, work with others, talk to others, lean on them, have them lean on you. Find your people, find your group of people that you can trust, that you feel comfortable around, that feel comfortable around you. I think it all becomes very important in the process. I think that's also part of the magic, and I'm wondering where you find magic most, whether it's in the process of creating a show, whether it's having the show be shown to an audience for the first time, or if there's any other point of the process where you feel like, wow, like this is what I love.
I'm a huge process human. I would say like my tagline as an artist is investing in a process focused practice because I think there's just so much data in process and much of that data will never be showcased to an audience, you know, and is a moment that I'm always so excited about is, hey, we've put this thing together. Let's share it with an audience and see what works, what doesn't. That's a very special moment, but nothing beats okay, we're going to be really messy together for like 3, 4, 5 weeks. It'll be a structured mess. You know, we're not going to do this with no preconceived thought. We're going to really think this through, but we have time to experiment and time to just try different things. And especially in a moment where I feel a lot of theater doesn't necessarily take risks or really large swings, I think a closed rehearsal room is a great place to try that. Even if the public never sees them, it's worth at least attempting. And a lot of the art that I really gravitate towards isn't necessarily rooted in realism. If I wanted realism, I'd watch TV all the time. I'm not a huge TV person, so I don't think I really want realism that bad. I want theatrical. But theatrical that's rooted in logic, theatrical that's rooted in logical magic. And so a lot of my rehearsal rooms are, okay, cool. There's this impossible stage direction. How can we creatively do this? And being able to do so and really open dialogue with every single member of the room. A core part of my practice is giving each artist their own sense of agency. Because, gosh, I do not need to be a talking head in a room like I am right now in this interview. You know, I don't like hearing myself talk that much. I promise I'll talk at some points in a room, but I rather curate and facilitate a conversation than really shape from there or provide a structure and start shaping the whole ensemble based on that structure. And that doesn't just go for actors either. Like my dream rehearsal process is we have designers in this rehearsal room as well, pretty much the whole time, having actors and designers having conversations with each other, which isn't unheard of, but certainly isn't very common in this industry, let alone those conversations leading to product that is seen on stage by an audience. That is that is what I'm really curious and continuing to invest in is that kind of open dialogue and just, hey, let's try it because we're going to learn a lot more from trying it than just talking about it. And if no one ever sees it, that's okay. But at least we can say we learned and we got a lot of information from it.
Yeah, and I think that's the makings of a great director, someone who wants to hear the other voices in the room and make them part of the conversation. I mean, I think that doesn't happen nearly enough. Needs to happen more, and I think it starts with directors like you. So I'm glad that that's happening and you have that mindset. I think it's why you're making the shows you're making. Which brings me to one of your most recent productions, Drown Man. What can you tell us about the show and what that experience was like bringing together like an ensemble of people?
Yeah. The context I think of that piece is I guess starting from the technique, I was first introduced to this technique called moment work by Tectonic Theater Project about 5 years ago. Tectonic did plays such as like the Laramie Project or Here There Are Blueberries, and moment work is their generative technique of making theater. When I learned this, like my sophomore year of college from on Zoom, actually, I was like, whoa, wait, you can think about theater this way and you can make theater like using weird lights and all this different stuff. And it's all like it all has a purpose in this world. It just, I think, really, I know rather, it shapes the way I think as a director now because everything has an intention, everything has a story, and I don't just need to be communicating ideas. So a lot of my thought process and everything you just heard me talk about collaboration is rooted in Tectonic's practice of making theater. All of that being said, I was doing a whole bunch of gigs throughout the fall, and in November they all kind of finished up. And I had spent a little bit of September devising theater. I spent the whole entire summer devising with another ensemble of 18 folks. And I was just really missing it because all of my work in September and October was assistant work. Love assisting all of those people. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I've learned so much from those shows, but I was ready to go be a creative again. And
Yeah.
so I sent out like a fury of texts and emails to some friends and collaborators of mine, some people I'd never worked with, some people I've been waiting to work with. And I managed to get about 8 artists, mostly actors altogether, for 3 different labs, is what I call them. A rehearsal kind of implies all of these preconceived notions of the American theater's rehearsal process. Like I was saying before, like the idea of, hey, we're here to experiment and try something. So let's call it a lab instead. So we had 3 3-hour labs. The first one was about 2.5 hours of learning the technique of moment work. So a lot of pedagogy and, hey, let's practice this new way of thinking. New way. It's really not complex. And that's not to knock the technique. It's just to really highlight how simple and accessible it can be and how these easy tools can really reshape the way we create theater. And so like that was most of the first lab. And then we had another like 6.5 hours to build a piece out of it. It's only like 8.5 minutes long. It's nothing crazy or anything like that. It's on YouTube now, so you can go check it out. But it's 8 actors on stage utilizing sound, lights, props, and theatrical ways to communicate a beginning, middle, and end based on Gabriel Garcia Marquez's short story, The Handsomest Drowning.
That's incredible,
Yeah,
especially having these long labs where you get to just be like in a room creating and experimenting. I think that's such a special experience that maybe not every production gets in the same way, at least. A lot of
yeah.
them, I guess you would get a script and an idea of how things is supposed to be, and maybe some things might change, but it's a little more rigid. And it sounds like this is a lot more flexible, where there's a lot of movement.
For sure. And like I had an actor over the summer when I did a similar lab. She said, like, oh my God, this is like recess, but for theater. It was silly, but I was like, wait a second. I think that means we're doing the right thing though. We're able to bring a lot of joy and curiosity into this process. And I think so much of at least my adult life is trying to understand all the things that made me happy as a kid and why they made me happy and how I can bring them back into my adult life. And that sense of play is certainly a huge one. Rooting back to like, oh, I built Legos and built worlds in my imagination as a kid, and to be able to cultivate a space for actors and other artists as well. Cause like the summer ensemble, for example, was a lot of designers as well, bringing actors and designers into these creative conversations together. I don't think it's as common as it should be. And honestly, a lot of that work is also possible due to a fantastic line producer I work with, Anastasia Ebright, because like Jaime said, you go far with other people. And she's one of the many people who like, oh yeah, I can't do any of this without a team. I've learned that very quickly and very early, thankfully. And so there's always a team of people helping me with all of these things.
Absolutely. Yeah, it always sounds like it takes a village to put together any show. But I think especially when you're the spearhead of it, when you're the leader and you have to pick the right team to work with. And it's comes down to a lot of trust for each other. You trusting them trusting you, and seeing what comes out of that. Because productions can end up a lot of different ways. But when it's something that is beautiful, it usually comes from that kind of community and that involvement and that interconnectivity. And it's just a beautiful thing to see. And it sounds like not only did you have that experience, but you keep recreating a similar experience with the people that you're putting together. So I think that that's an incredible thing to do. And I know you were also involved with Buena Vista Social Club as a producing intern, correct?
Yeah, producing intern.
Yeah. So what was that experience like? Because this show has definitely had a big breakout this year. It is being talked about. It is everywhere I turn, which is great. I'm so happy to see its success. So what has that been like for you to step into that role? And, what is your involvement? Like, what do you take on every day?
So my internship was quite limited in the process. I joined just as they started tech and I finished like the week after they opened or something like that. So it was only about like a 7 or 8 week span of time. And I had like the privilege of the guy who produced Once, Oren Wolf is his name. He also is the lead producer on Buena Vista Social Club. So accidentally I ended up learning from and following around every day the person who like made me get into theater, which is just a happy turn of events right there. And the day to day was truly like nothing was the same. Oren leads a whole bunch of different things from the touring company networks to Buena Vista to other projects that he's working on. So my day was always full of, yes, Buena Vista, but also all the other things Oren was doing. He and his office, Hannah and Isabella, were incredibly generous to let me just be a part of their culture for those 7 or 8 weeks. I was there from 8:30, 9 a.m. every day to like midnight, 1, even sometimes 2 a.m. in the theater in process with them. So it truly meant everything from budgets to hearing about contractual things, talking with the general management team, marketing meetings, press meetings, shadowing bits and pieces of tech, being there for each and every preview. So I've seen that show more than I've seen anything else in my life. And I would not want it any other way, too. Let's be clear. What a show to watch 40, 50 times. And then my favorite part was sitting in the production meetings after and just hearing how this A-list of team members is in conversation with each other and is solving problems and is finding creative solutions, and with these high budget shows in similar ways that we'd find creative solutions for low budget shows as well. It really kind of reminded me that theater is almost always theater wherever you go. It's just kind of a matter of the tools that you get and the money you have.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's so much that goes into creating a show and putting it out there like that, where there's all these little steps that are not really thought about by the general public who goes to see it, but has been thought about so much from top to bottom and backward and forward. And it makes me wonder how that maybe has affected how you approach your own content and the things that you create.
It's a great question there. The priorities is definitely what I walked away with the most clear. Like, oh, okay, if I learned anything, I learned about priorities, not only in terms of artistic and, okay, these are the notes we might try and implement today. This is when we'll try and hit this list of notes. But also, when you have 17 projects up in the air and you're in a management role for each of these projects, how do you make that happen? How do you identify what is high needs in the moment? How do you recognize the full timeline that you're working with and what can wait, what needs to happen, at least in a timely manner, and what can be a little later than people might expect, and then communicating those needs. It's nothing crazy. And it's, I think, something that so many people do on an everyday basis. If you think about it, we all have our human lives. Like we have to eat, we have to sleep, we have to do laundry. We also have to go do all these work related things as well. We're all managers. It's just, are we going to recognize that and name it as clearly? So Oren and the team really gave me a really great template of how I want to be as a manager.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear your different experiences and how they have kind of influenced how you take on the role of leader. Because it seems like each experience you've had has just added another piece and informed who you want to be and how you want to lead and put together a production. And which clearly is working because the people you put together come back and they like working with you and you keep making content, which I think is also a clear sign of something beautiful. There's magic there, right? And then it makes me wonder then about your process. Like when you have an idea for a show or a story or music or whatever it might be, where do you start? Number one, and is it completely alone that you start, or do you take some notes and then bring it to other people, or is that later in the process?
So I try to think of myself as a generative artist, but not as a writer whatsoever. So you'll never see me be like, oh, okay, wait, I have this idea for a story. Let me go type it out. No, please. And if I ever decide to do that, I think something's gone horribly wrong or I'm being held hostage. What I do love is being in conversation with other artists. So I think about like there's 4 writers whose work I'm developing right now. Actually, 5. I just started with another project. But like the closest collaborator of mine is this writer named Alexis, who I mentioned before. I mean, her and I, we were partnered up through kind of an interview series through a fellowship that we're part of. And signed on to direct her video gameplay. And as we were kind of working together, I really helped me identify I love finding a writer who I enjoy spending time with because we spend so much time together that needs to be a crucial part of this relationship, who also has a story that I am just so attached to. It's like magnetic. I can't stop thinking about her work very often. So it's so much so that I'm developing two of her plays now. And we have learned how to have really generative conversations. Be it sometimes we disagree on something, be it, oh, we're on the same wavelength and we're already 4 steps ahead of where we thought we were. That is what I've found. The people like that and relationships like that really foster my work because I am not going to sit here and write a play. Like that's just not my skill set. I have no desire to. But when I find those who have that passion, have that drive, it makes my job so much easier because I just get to become, hey, how can we continue to bring this further and further together? So it's that kind of partnership that I'm always looking for. Similarly, well, I'd say a lot of that is shared time then, right? It's not necessarily me working alone. And that's also with like a director slash creative producer hat on. But very often then what I need to do when developing my own work is put on just a, hey, producing logistics. How are we going to do this? How are we going to figure it out? And how are we going to do so ethically? Budget friendly? How are we going to make sure people are being paid for their time should that be an opportunity? So, like the Drown Man Ensemble, for example, that was a totally no money opportunity and project that we did. And we're very transparent about that as we're onboarding folks to it. I didn't get paid. We didn't pay for studio space. We didn't pay the artist. We didn't pay to share the work with the audience. Found it all through just public opportunities. Whereas, like developing work with this playwright, we did a residency for her last year where we paid her a little bit of money, myself and a producer. And in order to do that amount of work to have a paid residency, I knew, oh my goodness, I need an associate producer with me right now. There's a lot of line work, and I'm also going off and doing all these other jobs to pay my rent every day. So it's about, honestly, for me, it's about always finding collaboration because I work best in conversation. I can sit down and do the budgets and paperwork and all of that, no problem. But I'm only going to get so far in everything else about it if I'm by myself.
Absolutely. Speaking of those collaborations and the process of kind of developing a project even more, what do you think is your favorite part of that process? Is it kind of when you are both on the same page and things are just flowing really easily? Is it maybe hitting an obstacle and then finding that solution? What do you think has been your favorite part of that process?
I would say it's ooh, because I'm not a writer and every writer has their own unique process. I often feel a little, how can I help you when they're stuck in a moment? Even the best outlines will find holes in them constantly, so that the stuckness is inevitable. And I'm learning about myself as an artist and the playwright as an artist every time we hit those. And like, okay, cool. How do we navigate this moment of pause or this moment of wing in this story that we're trying to convey? Are we even approaching it from the right way? And it gets, I don't want to say it gets frustrating, at least for me. I'm not a person who gets stressed or frustrated very often, but it gets like, it's like just a puzzle sitting in front of me, and I need to figure out how to do this puzzle because I'm stubborn and I'm not going to leave it. And I think it's definitely that payoff of, okay, wait, what if we try this totally radical thing? What if we change the structure of Act One? Or what if we just change this little detail about this character? Or, oh my God, it's been sitting in front of us the whole time, which is very often the solution that I find with these projects. Is this things have been in front of us the whole time, but we've just been either so micro or so macro, we can't find it. So I guess it'd be the payoff of, oh, we found this new way forward. And I'm looking forward to, for each of these projects, having my favorite part be having those conversations in the room with actors or designers and not just like me and the playwright on Zoom. I'm very eager. Some of these projects are pretty close to production ready. Like Alexis has a superhero play, which we've been working on over the last year. There's also a
Awesome.
play by Katsura Kakugoshira, who's a Japanese player I started working with at the top of the year, and we're developing a piece about the bombing of Hiroshima called "What Oppenheimer 2023 Did Not Show You," and that's another piece. That's the Foley ensemble one, which I'm like, oh, okay, this will be ready for production sooner than I think we initially thought. And I want to start learning the lessons that you can only learn in a room now because we're making theater. It doesn't live on a page.
Yeah, I think that's such a special part of the process then too, like moving it off the page. And it's so interesting to be in the development of multiple projects at once. I'm curious about this superhero play and well what you share about it? What are you able to talk about it? Because it sounds like it would be really interesting.
For sure. So I don't have the log line down just yet. It's changing ever so slightly as the weeks go on. But we follow this 10-year-old named Maricela. Her parents are campesinos, so her life, she knows it, is in the fields every day. And she gets an opportunity to go into public school for the first time ever. And this young girl's world gets totally changed as she enters this school. And oh my goodness, how does school work? How does this whole all function, and how do I fit within school? And being a 10-year-old, they perceive the world a little differently than we might as adults. So everything is really kind of exaggerated in that sense. Is it really as bright and as cold as it is in her head? Probably not, but that's how she's perceiving it. And she's also a kid. She has a wild imagination, and we get to follow how that imagination really saves her and comforts her, the lessons it teaches her, and truly like how every single person can be a superhero in their own way, especially Latinos who are willing to work for whatever they need.
It already sounds beautiful and hitting so many like spots for me personally. But also brings me to my next question. I mean, being a Colombian director in theater is a big deal and I think very important. And how do you think that has kind of crafted or helped shape your experience? And what do you hope to create by stepping into a role that not many other Latinos get to experience?
That's a really great question. And I mentioned before, like I was born in Bogota, but I was adopted when I was about like 6 months old or so. And unknowingly, for a very long time, that adoption, because the people I was raised by, my parents, they're so very wonderful and they've given me so much, but they're very white folks, you know? So I wasn't raised within traditional Colombian culture. I was raised in like suburbia Buffalo. I didn't really understand what it meant to be Latino, what it meant to be adopted, what it meant to be Colombian specifically until my 20s. That's when I started going on that journey. And I think honestly, I'm still really early in that journey about what does it mean to have identities rooted in multiple places, to be raised outside of the culture that I was born into, and to be on the journey to reconnect with that. I'm not a native Spanish speaker. I read really well, but I don't speak as well. It's a huge area of self consciousness for me. Yet, ironically, a lot of the work I've done over the last 3 years has been in Spanish. Don't know how that happened. But all of that being said, I feel like I'm kind of stuck in the middle of a place I don't know, but feels really familiar. And I think that does really uniquely position me as a director because a lot of my job is hey, there's this huge piece of like this huge grayed out map in front of you, right? And as we start to work together and be in conversations together, we get to explore it and unlock more and more of that map, more and more of the identities of these world, these people, their relationships, and gain a further understanding. And while that doesn't necessarily speak to the direct part of your question about my connection to being Latino and what that relationship is, I think I find the parallel in me on my own journey of figuring out what that is for myself as it relates to me being a director, guiding people through figuring out what these relationships are on the stage and in this world that we're building and being comfortable with not knowing and just again trying things and figuring it out through conversation. I hope that as I get older, I will have a very different response to that question that you just asked. And I don't feel bad about what I just said, but I haven't thought about it to be honest. And I think I have a lot more to learn about myself before I can really like get you a solid.
Well, in all honesty, I think the journey never ends of trying to figure that out. I'm going through it. I know plenty of other people are. And I think something you shared earlier about loving to explore and understand worlds kind of is part of what you're doing, just for yourself and for others when you're directing them, when you're understanding both the characters and the actors and the rest of the crew and ensemble around you. All of that is part of understanding others. And I think it shows when an audience responds and they feel seen or understood. It's about understanding people. And so that brings me to one of my last questions, and that's how do you hope to create magic for others?
I mean, I think it happens in two like umbrella ways. The umbrella ways being like process and product, right? The magic for and processes for those a part of the process, be it artists, be it technicians, be it all the other things, administration folks as well. They're very much so part of that process. And I think it's important to find ways to continue to loop them in, like especially a development or marketing team. I come from theater admin, so I have a very strong understanding of that. And it's something I wish more people would advocate for is finding ways for those two departments specifically to intersect with the work in a room. But all of that being said, magic for me comes out of relationships and conversations, and I can't do any of those without like values rather. So I often lead with the values of care, technique, curiosity, generosity, and especially courage. What we're doing is a really scary thing often. We build up the muscle and we get used to it, but nevertheless, we're often asked to go into a space full of strangers and practice vulnerability. That is not an easy thing to do, and not everyone can do it. So, if you have the courage to pursue this industry and pursue this type field of work, I think it's worth remembering all of those things because it will help us take care of the room and the culture of the room. So that's kind of on process. And on the product, I don't think we talk about audience enough. And I'm never building for, hey, this is exactly how I picture this moment happening in my head, and it's going to happen just like this, and I'm going to be prescriptive to get there. But I'm always thinking about how will the audience receive this? Will they understand what is happening? How might it impact them? What might be unclear? What will need more clarification later on in the process? Because my goal is to make sure the audience sees a very clear beginning, middle, and end, and that the arcs that they are receiving are what we're trying to present on stage, right? And I try and do so through music, movement, and magic. And I say magic being like, okay, what are the logical rules of this world and how is it operating? How is music and movement really contributing to that? And not necessarily always in the musical theater sense, but music is sound design. Music is the sound that an actor's footsteps make on the stage. All of these things come together to create the world. And trying to be conscious of that to just build a nice roller coaster ride for them.
Well said. Yeah, I think it's about crafting those worlds, like you said, and having the audience feel something, connecting with them on that level, which I think it's such a beautiful thing, and I think it shows in the fact that you get to keep creating, which you're doing. So my last question really is Battlefront 2, who is your go-to character?
Oh, come on. It's always the snipers, man. So I'm talking like OG Battlefront 2, you know?
Okay, yeah.
You kind of Battlefront 2. I do have it, the new one. I just started playing that with the revival this fall. I
Yes.
love that you asked this question. This is great. I'm a sniper guy. But I have respect for those heavy troopers. I appreciate them.
Yeah, they got a lot of power behind them, I gotta say. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for being on. It has been a pleasure. I'm very excited to keep following what you're doing. I know you have things in the works, things you're going to be talking about and sharing more in the new year. So I'm going to drop all your social media below so people can follow you. And thanks for being on and being a magic maker. And everyone out there, keep making magic.
Thanks
Bye,
for sharing
everybody.
your time.
Of course.